Welcome to the Matchbook Six Nations Betting Podcast. I'm back for week 2. Sorry for missing week 1. I was the most middle class reason ever, I believe. Skiing holiday, so I couldn't make it. Last minute skiing holiday. What can you do? The wife insists you have to go. Literally the most middle class reason for missing ever. I apologise for that. But
Do most people ski?
I leave you 1 week, Sully. 1 week.
Yeah,
and
1
it
week.
turns
What
into
damage I did.
the pro English podcast. What was going on? What happened? Talk me through it, mate.
Yeah, back to England. Heavy on England. I think Mark was in agreement with the 1-12 market as well. Eddie Jones, what a stubborn man. I mean, like, he saw certain failings last weekend in Paris, and you would think that this weekend might make a couple of changes to rectify that. Now, obviously, he's brought in Vunipola. Willie Hines, the scrum half, is literally, to me, is the most like-for-like change I've ever seen with Ben Youngs. Tom Curry, terrific player. You saw the World Cup he had. Probably one of the best players at the World Cup, if not definitely the best back row forward, outside probably Peter Steph the Toy. You're leaving him at 8. There was 2 scrums, especially in the first half. I know it's the last day. England going forward, and the guy just didn't know how to control the ball at the base of the scrum. It's not his fault. He's never played a game there for sale, never played a game there for England. His first ever game at 8 is away in Paris, and in the Six Nations. Just not good enough. And you would think, like I said, that he would change it up this week, bring maybe Don Brand back in, even try Ben Earl there or Sam Simmons, bring someone back in, even make that change to bring someone in on the bench, and then move Curry back. But he hasn't done it. And one of the funny things he was saying during the week, I thought was quite funny, was he says he sees Curry becoming a kind of a Rodney Soyalo, who I always thought was pretty kind of average for and all of that. But I don't know. Very disappointed. I thought France didn't even have to be that good. I think defensively they were very organised. They were just up for it. They played England well. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to go. I think he's a very, very stubborn man. He's a good coach, obviously, but I think sometimes you can get too stubborn and just not admit defeat in certain things. I think that's what he's done here.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very strange game, wasn't it? I didn't really know what to make of it. It was one of those games you always feel like you just want to pretend didn't happen, ignore, and just sort of refocus on information that you had previously, because there was a lot of interesting things that happened in that game, but none of them really felt super relevant to what would happen in the rest of the tournament, with the exception of maybe the French defence. I mean, how did you see it, Mark? What were your feelings after that game? I imagine you've watched it back a couple of times since.
Well, I thought the whole weekend actually was rather underwhelming, and I don't know if that's whether it's just me being a bit hungover from the Rugby World Cup and the players and coaches as well, or the fact we've got 4 new coaches, 4 new captains. I'm not really sure, but there was something wasn't quite right, I thought, across all 3 matches. I think the French game was probably the highlight, really. The caveat being England weren't at the races, but I look at that team. He's just he was picking square pegs in round holes. You take Billy Vunipola out, and then you get Manu Taulagi injured as well. You've lost 2 massive carriers there in the space of the first sort of 30 minutes, first half. I thought Jonathan Joseph hasn't been the same player for a couple of seasons. He's certainly not a like-for-like change for Manu in the backs. Furbank at fullback had probably a real debut to forget as well. And you've got players like Owen Farrell dropping the ball twice, unforced errors. I look at that sort of the 10-12 axes, the 2 playmakers of Ford and Farrell. I think Eddie Jones admitted he shouldn't have picked Ford in the semi-final against South Africa, yet he's gone straight back to do that this week, or last weekend, and again this weekend. Moving Daly from fullback to wing just didn't seem necessary.
Sorry for cutting across, I don't think Ford is the issue here. I really don't. I think Ford is almost like the scapegoat in some way. I think he's been better than Farrell. And if you look at any player in the English backs, even the last day, he was the only one who looked like he was up for it.
I'm not blaming Ford at all. I'm just saying there's something about, especially when you've got Jonathan Joseph there playing at 13, and it surprised me that they're going to line up in that 10, 12, 13 channel this weekend. But I've seen a stat that they've won, I think, all bar 1 game from 16 when it's been that sort of midfield trio. But one of those that defeats was the Scotland game away at Murrayfield. So I'm not going to read too much into that, but I think the overriding feeling from the weekend in that match in particular was, we sort of talked last week about potential in this French team and what they could potentially achieve in the next couple of years. I didn't expect the defence to be quite as good as it was so quickly under Sean Edwards. Apparently he doesn't need a translator. He's already picked up French enough to communicate directly and with clarity to his players. It certainly seemed that way. Take out Johnny May's incredible finishing in England could easily have been trialless and almost scoreless in that match as well. And I think France spent the longest time out of possession on round 1, over 22 minutes in defence, yet conceded the fewest clean breaks and meters. across all 3 matches, which is quite incredible, really. The first time England have been pointless as well at half-time in a 5 or 6 Nations games in 1988. So, yeah, quite incredible, really. Didn't expect such a turnaround from France again as well. Wouldn't be going mad over France after that one match either. I didn't think they were hugely impressive. I just thought out of possession, it was a big change from what we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's we'll come on to this weekend's game very shortly. Just to kind of finish up on that and get your views on it. Were France really that good? Were England really that bad, or was it neither? Kind of like where would you lean in terms of kind of what shaped that game? Was it a massive improvement for France, or was it just a significant fall off for England? Because that'll kind of help us with our bets this weekend, I think, if we how we frame it from last weekend.
I'd go with the England side probably. I think it's a bit of both, if we're being honest. But I think more of England, just because we've seen what heights England can reach in that semi-final against New Zealand. Obviously, I think that World Cup was interesting. It's quite strange, really, because some teams are at their absolute best one week and then the complete worst the next. And we saw that with England, especially. We saw it with New Zealand even. But I think for France, there's massive potential in the next couple of years. Whether it's going to be this season, management they've got behind the scenes is obviously fantastic. But England, to me, just looked hungover, looked complacent, beaten up in the collisions. Some of the set piece didn't work at all. The conditions are poor, in fairness, but no excuses really. England should have been better than they were.
Well, luckily they got a really easy soft landing this weekend. Having a gale force winds in Edinburgh, playing the Scotland team, absolutely hungry for a win. Talk us through how the betting's looking, Sully, and then we'll get into how we see this shaping up.
It's an interesting market. I mean, like, look ahead line for this was about 10. There was 9 prior to the English game against France. It's down to 7.5 now. We've seen probably the most money all week for Scotland. Obviously, we have massive weather implications this weekend across Europe. We love talking about the weather, so this is actually a perfect jumping off spot here for us. Absolutely perfect jumping off spot. But yeah, that's their general lines at the moment. 39.5 is the total. I'm very interested in this total, and I'll probably just kick off from here, Al, if you don't mind.
Go for it, mate.
So I think this comes down even further. I was hoping for a line maybe in the kind of lowish 40s. Well, look, I was really hoping for a line in the mid 40s, but I knew I wasn't going to get it. I think even if you look at the Scotland defence the last day, Steve Tandy has come in from the Waratahs, ex-Ospreys head coach, so you'll know him well, Al, and he seems to have made a pretty good difference there to the Scottish D. You also look at the general kind of, the ferocity that the forwards played with in Dublin the last day. I haven't seen that in a while. That was essentially always their weak link against the Irish pack, that they couldn't really front up, but they absolutely more than fronted up and matched them up really well. And then you look at the English, and I found a stat there in Opta that I thought was really, really kind of significant about how the game went on. They won 69 rucks in the French 22. I mean, that would equate to me to a lot of points. That would be 28, 30 points. They spent a lot of time in the French 22. The French had 11 in the English 22. So I'll just show you how kind of smash and grab their tries was. And I mean, even for Johnny May's tries, they came from kind of out of nothing, just his brilliance. And it just showed you how blunt that English attack was when you don't have the ball carriers like your Billy Vunipolas and those kind of guys. And I mean, I think they've tried to rectify that this week with definitely Mako coming back in, George Cruz slightly better ball carrier and Chalius, but not a massive upgrade there. And even again, you look at the back row and you still have Curry and Underhill, but they're in the wrong spots. And
how can they not find a number 8 in the whole of England?
They have loads of number 8s. They've loads, and they've like really good number 8s. We talked about it last week. I've watched a lot of Harlequins games this year for whatever reason. They seem to be on BT Sports a lot on Friday night, especially. And like Don Brent, more times than not, he's been the best player on the field, and he showed it even against the top European teams like Clermont. I cannot for the life of me understand how he's on the team. And then if you look at Sam Simmons, who's a kind of a different player to Don Brent, but he's a better option at 8 as well. So why would you not stick with Curry at 6 and Underhill at 7 and just bring one of those guys in? And I mean, I'll go even further, even the likes of Nathan Hughes, who's kind of playing pretty well for Bristol this year.
Yeah,
and it just seems to be an absolute no-brainer. And Mark touched on Jonathan Joseph there as well. Like, he's not a bad player, but for the type of game that they want to play, he doesn't really fit the type of game. He's got almost like more of a kind of a Southern Hemisphere player. And obviously we saw, Tulagi going off injured last, and you kind of knew then that they're going to be pretty blunt there in the midfield. And if you look back at the World Cup, it's arguable to say that their best midfield was, Tulagi and Henry Slade. That's when they looked absolutely dynamite. And you play Farrell or Ford at 10 and, away you go. But even as a ball carrier, like, Farrell's not a great ball carrier. We saw it the last day. He can't really break tackles. He's more of the second receiver, and that's what he's brought in for. And I did think that Anthony Watson would be back at 15. They were very hopeful he'd be back at 15. He's not a good strike runner. But I just look at it, and outside of Johnny May there, I mean, I don't really know where the English tries are going to come from in the back line. And in the forward line, where they're a good unit, set piece should be, again, pretty strong. Scrum and line-up. I don't see where the tries are coming from here. And the other side of the ball, Scotland, as much as they kind of showed up well against Ireland the last day, I had this kind of nagging thing during the game. I was thinking to myself, my God, if Finn Russell was here, especially in the second half when the game opened up, I don't think Ireland would have won that game. I really do not think they would have won that game. I just think it was tailor-made for him, and they just looked a small bit lacking creativity, and it's hard to see where the Scottish tries are going to come from as well. So 39.5, and I think that's probably getting a bit lower. That's my play right now. And we also have the weather coming in. So you have all these little factors. And I just think it's first team to 17 wins there is my general kind of first thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think the game's going to play out? Eddie Jones has been doing his normal mind games, let's not overplay how sophisticated they are, but talking about the Scots always wanted to kick the ball, even though England kick the ball significantly more than Scotland ever do. There's a very strong wind. We're not really sure what the rain's going to be doing, whether it's going to come in by that point, but it's very likely to be very strong wind in that stadium, which is pretty open to it. How do you see the game playing out? Do you see that ball being kept in hand a lot? Do you see people trying to take advantage of the poor conditions and try and put people under pressure? How do you expect both these coaches to kind of attack these conditions?
Well, that's my general kind of thought process with this underplay. Now, I mean, look, I'll take it to another level. You could be looking at, under tries. You could be looking at first half draws here. I just think that it just strikes me, if the weather is as bad as we think it's going to be, then it just strikes me as a kind of a 9-6 kind of first half. And yes, I just can't see the ball getting out too much to the backs. Now, obviously, we have to be aware that with a low total like that, crazy things can happen. There can be just a dodgy try. You've still got the likes of, Stuart Hogg, if he knows how to dot the ball down this weekend, he's a threat, But I mean, looking through the Scottish pack, I think they will match up pretty well against this English pack. I don't think England will blow them away. And we saw it last weekend that there just seems to be a bit of a ferocity. One thing that would worry me slightly, I was listening to the Times podcast earlier in the week. Alistair Reid, who covers Scotland for the Times, he was saying how there was a serious sense of jubilation in the Scottish team after the game against Ireland. Now, I may have misquoted him with serious sense of jubilation, but there was a kind of a sense of maybe relief/happiness, which would kind of turn me off Scotland is small, but keeping this close. But I think there's just too many factors here at play, and there's way too many concerns about England. Look, we got England wrong last week. I thought that they'd have enough for France, but after looking at that one, and this is only one game sample size in this tournament, after looking at that one game, there's still a hell of a lot there to worry about, and I just don't think he's made the changes that I would have made to rectify these for England.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting side he's picked, because you would expect that type of team to be really looking to spread the ball wide to get around the edges and get around Scotland that way. As you say, they don't really have crash ball runners in the middle of the park. They don't have Tuolangi smashing holes in the middle. As you say, Farrell doesn't really do it. Joseph is very much an outside shoulder sort of runner. Kind of light, fast guys all around the pitch. It's interesting. Doesn't really seem a game designed for the conditions you're expecting. I mean, no one wants to hear my opinion. Mr. Mark O'Haire, so how are you seeing this one? Are you agreeing with Sully?
Yeah, I would agree to oppose points. My angle really was to oppose England as favourites at the price and the spread that they are. I looked at this game last weekend, and you could have got an 11-point start on Scotland, which was far too big at the time, despite what happened last weekend. And obviously that's been clipped right in now to 7.5 points, which I think is much more accurate and fair, I'd still favour on the Scotland side. You talked about the midfield there of Ford, Farrell, Joseph. I think that's an area Scotland can attack and overpower them. They did so 2 years ago. I think they'll try and do it again this time around. Sully's talked about Scotland last weekend in Dublin. I was very impressed with them. I thought they came out battling really well, defended really well. Attack was reasonably sharp. I know they didn't finish their opportunities enough, but I think the same old sort of Scottish errors kind of came into play, gave away too many penalties in the final third, and just quite didn't have the nous to really get over the line. I think the Irish team defended very well, in fairness too. But yeah, I look at this game. I think England-Scotland games in Murrayfield are always scraps. So actually, any game at Murrayfield, really, depending on the opposition, tends to be a bit of a scrap, really. England have only won by 8 points or more. I think they've only won 3 of the last 7 in Murrayfield. Very rarely win by 8 points or more. I think 3 of the last 10 games between these 2 games in Murrayfield have been settled by more than 8 points. And England's away record in the Six Nations now is starting to look really bleak. It's 5 defeats in the last 7 away in this competition. So we kind of talked a lot about England. For Scotland, as I say, I was quite impressed. Numerous opportunities, plenty of territory and possession against Ireland. The set piece fronted up. I thought the front 5 played very well too. If they can cut out those penalties, I just actually thought Adam Hastings played pretty well, ran the show pretty well too. But there's no fear factor from this Scottish team anymore. The last 2 games they played against England, they've obviously beaten them in Murrayfield and then came back in that crazy game at Twickenham last season. So, and they'll have seen what happened to England last week in Paris. And while they might have been kind of relieved by their own performance in Ireland, despite going down in defeat, I think they'll be very confident that they can trouble this England team. The weather's obviously a big contributor too, which I think will play into their part as well. So yeah, I do like Scotland here, plus the start. I think just as an alternative, one sort of quirky stat I saw crop up this week as well. Hugh Jones, who's played himself back into form this season, playing very well in the midfield. He's got 10 tries and 24 appearances for Scotland. But he's got a brace in both of his last 2 games against England. He's a powerful ball carrier. He's a good support runner too, and I think he could thrive in this kind of match. Just again against that England midfield as well. He's quite a big price to score at any time.
Yeah, he's 21.0 first try scorer at the moment. It's interesting. Yeah, very decent.
Yeah, it's a game where my initial instincts were definitely towards Scotland with the points, especially when there was still some +9 available. As you say, that you look back at you always have to be a little bit careful with historic trends in the Six Nations because the correlation between one year and the next is often pretty low. But there's not many games where England really get away from them up at Murrayfield. The weather's not going to help that.
No.
As Sully correctly says, unless they have a big shift in the way they play the game from the World Cup and from last weekend, you don't see that backline, really scoring a lot of points. So yeah, that I'm very much with you there on that, Mark.
They've won by 8 points or more just once in the last 7 in Edinburgh, which isn't great considering how much dominance they've had over Scotland in the previous, forget the last 2 years, but the previous 10, say. They've actually dominated this fixture.
And it's a bit narrative-y, but I mean, Scotland always just give that extra 10 or 15% when they see those white shirts. It is what it is. I mean, that's we don't have to explain the whole history there. I mean, they just do give it that bit extra when they see the English Rose rock into town. So I mean, look, that's not the basis for why you should have a bet either. At the same time, but I mean, look, it's very hard to look at last weekend's games and not maybe be kind of enamored with the team that, while they'd still lost the game with Scotland, you could see that they probably are trending slightly upwards. And, you're getting 7.5 points on what's going to be a really crap day in Murrayfield. And I think it's a southerly breeze. If I remember rightly where that stadium is, I think it's kind of north to south. So it's going to be behind one team in the first half and the other team in the second half. So I just think it's, for me, I'd be kind of just looking at attacking unders in this one. And I don't know if that 39.5 will hold into Saturday. That'd be my first assumption anyway.
Yeah, it is interesting. England almost seems to be trying to. Eddie Jones almost seems to up in some respects. Why he's messing around with that back row, I have no idea. But anyway,
he's a stubborn man. He's obviously a very clever coach, but I think he just tries to think that he's more clever than everyone else, and that's always a kind of a pretty dumb thing to do, I would suggest. So we shall see. But even the scrum half situation, like Willie Hines, Ben Young, you should have seen at the World Cup that these guys, they're not bad players, but at this level of the game, they don't have it.
Is that really the best you can do, is what you're saying?
Yeah,
exactly. The answer is no, it's not.
No, yeah, they've got a lot of younger. Even Ben Spencer there as Saracens would have been a better option to him. Again, my opinion, but
I mean, there's always the danger with England. They've got so much talent; they could turn it on and make us look really silly here. But I mean,
potentially,
I think it's hard to. I think just on the basis of what we've seen and coming into this game, it's really hard to argue against both of those bets. And I wouldn't put anyone off either of them. That's enough about Scotland, England. I think. Let's move on to the game.
The game of the weekend.
Should we try and not fall out in this one? It's possible.
So you're the most pessimistic Welsh man in the world, anyway. So you're just going to say that Ireland are going to win. So yeah.
Well, I'm not sure anymore. There was glimmers of hope. What everyone in Wales was hoping for, that Pivac's going to take the steel of the Gatland side, add a little bit more creativity on top of it, and then you've got a really dangerous looking team. And there was little glimpses that might actually start to happen from last weekend. But I mean, I'm expecting you guys to say there's going to be a massive Irish revival here, stamp all over Wales. Mark O'Haire, talk us through it. Where are you seeing this one?
I mean, I looked at this game earlier in the week and I saw 5.5 start for Wales, and I really like that. It's gone down to 4.5 and about 3.5 now as well. That
did not last long, did it?
No, but I do. I guess the market's now saying that these two teams would probably be rated. Be a pick'em on a neutral turf now. Basically, it's what it's saying. But I still favour Wales in that scenario. So for that reason, I have to favour Wales with the start. I still make them narrow favourites. I think they've had 2 reasonably kind warm-ups now with the Barbarians game and in Italy as well to sort of fine-tune things. I think they've got the edge in the back row, possibly even at half-back as well. Obviously, Tompkins came on and made a massive impact in the midfield. Felt a bit sorry for McNichol missing out, but getting North back on the wing, suddenly that sort of back line starts to look functional, strong, solid, inventive, with a clinical edge as well, with the way Josh Adams is playing at the moment. Defensively, never really been questioned about Wales as well. And you look back to the game in Cardiff last year where they completely suffocated Ireland. If they put anything similar like that together in defence, I really worry about Ireland, because whilst they have tried a couple of new things last weekend, still worry about the invention, the spark that's required. Still look a bit robotic and predictable. Obviously, Wales's record in Dublin isn't fantastic, but basically only England win in Dublin in the Six Nations in the last couple of seasons. So I'm still not going to take too much into that, because this Welsh team on a bit of a roll. I know they've changed management and stuff, but if you take out the World Cup warm-ups, they've only lost twice since the 2018 Autumn Internationals. That was to South Africa in the World Cup semi by 3 points, and the other was the third-place playoff. So they're a team that knows how to get results, knows how to perform. Had a few issues at the scrum against Italy. I know Pivac reckons it was more down to the interpretations of Luke Pearce in that match. So would expect better again this weekend. A team I'm struggling to see massive weaknesses in, really, to be honest. And there's, as you say, there's a bit of a freshness about how they're approaching games now. A bit more invention, really, from them under the new coach. And I think with Ireland, it was a little bit underwhelming, really, against Scotland. I know everyone looks at the error that Hogg made over the line, but they should really have won that match anyway. But Scotland defended very well, and if Scotland can defend very well against Ireland, I worry about what they're going to do against a Welsh team who are even better than that. Bar the sort of high turnover rate which the Irish achieved, I wasn't hugely impressed by most of what they did. And I also think Gary Ringway's is a massive miss now. Henshaw coming in, he's a bit samey to Bundyaki. Neither of them have the sort of skill set to really open up a back three, which is quite exciting, but aren't going to see enough of the ball, I don't think. The box kicks were back and forth again, which I know it's an evil that has to be done sometimes to try and create a bit more fast ball. But I just want a bit more from Ireland, really. And I think they're vulnerable this weekend. Obviously, the conditions aren't going to be fantastic. From what I can gather, it's going to get worse as the game goes on. But I think it's going to be tight. It's going to be attritional. I think Wales with the start is the way to play it. But I'd also look at something like the half-time draw at around 8-1, because I don't think there's going to be a huge amount between these two teams, and even potentially a drop goal in this match, which should be a handy price, probably around 3-4 to 1-ish.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it briefly there. Yeah, the centre partnership for Ireland, lacking a bit of imagination. Then you got a 34-year-old Johnny Sexton inside them. Sorry. I mean, is this a game where we're going to see a lot of tries coming from either side? Wales are cutting loose a little bit more, but still, a pretty reliable team to not try and rack up the points in every possible occasion. I mean, what's your feeling on the totals here, Sully? I know this is the market you always like to play.
Well, yeah, it's a funny one. It's a very low total, obviously.
It is a very low total.
Yeah, it's a very low total, 36.5, which would indicate that weather is coming. Like Mark said, I think it's going to be there for the first half, but I think it's going to get worse even during the halftime period, just looking at some of the radar maps. I have played a bet in this, but it's kind of a funny one. It's an odds against. I've done the first half highest scoring half for that reason. Not massively, right, but it's just generally the theme of what I was looking for, that it might just slow down in the second half. It's interesting. Mark touched on a lot of stuff that I have in my notes there, especially with the centres. That Irish combination, while they played together at Connacht, more often than not when he was at Connacht, Robbie Henshaw was playing a fullback anyway. But they're very similar, and that combination 2 years ago between Bundy Aki at 12 and Chris Farrell at 13, far better balance to it. If for me that would have been the option there, or even someone like Will Addison, or I heard on Off the Ball here in Ireland last Monday night, Ron O'Gara even said Keith Earls at 13 outside Aki. Just different options there, and it just seems to almost be like Henshaw's kind of next man. But for me, Henshaw's an inside centre. He's not a 13, and it never really has been. So yeah, and I sometimes kind of look at teams and see, look at different units, say the back three, the centres, the half backs, the back row, the second row. And I'm just looking here at the list. I don't see where Ireland are substantially better than any in these units. I think I can make a case for them in the front row. Furlong, Healy and Herring, they should have it over the Welsh front row. We saw the Welsh front row struggle at scrum time last weekend. No, I know Wayne Pivac has been, consulting with the IRB referees about this. Alan Rowland, the head of refereeing with the IRB, and who's refereeing this game, Ron Pot, this weekend. So I think they're probably trying to work that one out. But I mean, back row, I think Wales have the advantage. I think right now they've definitely got it in the half backs as well. With Tomas Williams and Dan Baker was playing some great rugby as well. The only thing that would concern me from a Welsh point of view is if they're trying to play this new kind of brand of rugby that Pivac's bringing in, I just think that it might not be the game to bring it in this weekend with the weather. They might have to just go back to maybe the Warren ball, so to speak, kind of crash it up and hurt Ireland that way. So my only bet was the first half, but I would totally be getting with Wales +5 if it was there. But it's not there. But I think even +3.5 with the weather coming in, and even looking at that price and matchup now, I think that line is going to be favouring Wales kind of closer again to kickoff. Yeah, I find it very hard to make a case for Ireland. I think if you're approaching this even backing teams in the match odds, Mark's favourite markets 1 to 12. I think that's a very good way. If you fancy Wales, I think you're going to take them 1 to 12. Same with Ireland. I think you'll be backing them with the 1 to 12 market. You're going to get 2.6 for Ireland, and you're going to get for Wales at 1 to 12. You're going to get 3.2. So I mean, I think they're solid enough markets. Whoever wins is not going to be much in it, but no bet for me on this. Exceptionally worried though. Very worried.
I mean, I'd pick up on two Mark's points there. I think for people looking for some bets on the game, some interesting bets on the game. The draw at half time, you wouldn't necessarily even put anyone off the draw at full time in this game. It feels like it should be quite a close one, just because the sides are closely matched.
Yeah.
The way that Wales have traditionally played the game, the lack of creativity in midfield for Ireland, weather, all these factors. I feel this one's could be tight, kind of it comes back to the other point Mark made about, I was actually talking to the Professor Brad Allen about this in the week. The implication from that line is that these are basically scratch sides. They're evenly matched.
Well, I think
it makes it quite easy to make your judgment call, doesn't it?
I think Mark is onto something in that sense. We were talking about the home advantage. See, like rugby's a funny one. I mean, generally with the NFL, what Brad is into, like, I mean, home advantage is worth 3 points for the most part. But I think with rugby, you can kind of look at it, and for me, it was always a try. In my head, it was always nearly a try, 4.5, 5. So I think right now you're probably getting, the value is on Wales there slightly. I think it's coming back. I think on a neutral field right now, you would have to say that Wales will be favourites. I don't even think it's a pick 'em. I think if you bet it in a neutral field, say if they're playing in Twickenham, you'd be back in Wales at a pick 'em, no problem at all. I do I don't want to get too bogged down with the weather, but I do know that if it was dry, I know, but I do know if it was dry tomorrow, if it was dry in Dublin tomorrow, I'd be back in Wales. That is very much the way it is. But I think they have a bit more rugby in them at the moment. And I'll be honest, we touched on it last week, and they're coming into this Six Nations. Before last week, they were fourth in the outright betting, and I know they have to go to Twickenham, but I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, I don't see where this team has regressed, and I think that PVAC in the long run is actually going to make this team even better than what they were.
Yeah, the signs are promising, but let's not get carried away with one game against.
You'll never get carried away.
Really poor Italy side.
I know, but I do think that that the type of rugby that he wants to play, that we've seen with the Scarlets in the past, I think this very much suits the panel he has now.
How did that work out for the Scarlets?
They won one Pro 14 title. It's good enough. No Welsh club teams win anything. That was good enough.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, in terms of the kind of matchups that you're talking about there, is there any way you think that Wales are particularly stronger than Ireland? You said you couldn't really see anywhere that Ireland were stronger than Wales. But is there any way you think Wales are particularly stronger than Ireland? Might help guide people towards
back row,
maybe try score.
Back row and halfbacks, and 6 to 10, I would say they're very strong. And that's more often than not, that's where the game is won.
Possessions,
yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, we'll try and stay friends during it, but if we have to turn WhatsApp off for a bit, it's fine. It feels to me like it could be a game where it's, we've talked about this before on the podcast and just between us ourselves. It used to be such a friendly game, Wales Ireland, when I was a kid growing up. It's such a sort of niggly sort of game now, and there's a lot of bad feeling there, and with some bad weather and tight game, and possibly some, there's not, if you're going to pick a referee to pick some dodgy decisions, he's certainly right.
I love
there, right up there.
So he's never done any of us favors in the past.
No. Card markets might be one to watch in that game as well. I don't know if you could have a look at some lines. But yeah, we're running out of time, I think. So let's move on to the final game of the weekend and see if we've got anything for.
Do we have to?
I guess so. We'll go on it quickly, then we can get back to arguing about Wales Ireland. What are we looking at with the betting?
Betting wise, we're looking at. Okay, so look, I hate to say it, there's been a bit of money come from Italy in the past 24 hours there, matchup. I don't know, and it's got to be weather related. I think that storm is probably going to be potentially at its worst on Sunday. I think it's going to get south enough to France. Before we recorded, we were still kind of waiting on teams. I can see the French team is named now, as expected. Very few changes. I think we knew that Vakatawa was out. Arthur Vincent comes in, good, decent player from Montpellier. Rata is still in at 11. So one change, which I think has to bode well for France and French backers in general here, because, I mean, so many times in the past few years we've seen kind of, reactive changes. And obviously it's far easier not to change a team off the back of a big win against the tournament favourites. But, I mean, it still looks very strong. And I mean, look, we were talking about the back row there a second ago, and Francois Cross, Olivon, and Aldrit. I thought they were outstanding the last day, and they're going to find it. I think Italy again. I mean, geez, there was patches. I thought in the first 15 minutes that they were in behind Wales on a couple of occasions, but my gosh, they just can't get to the fifth or the sixth play in their set. And it's interesting. I was thinking of you, Mark O'Haire. I know you're a big fan of the NRL, and one of the big stats in rugby league down there is, how many teams get through their full set of tackles. And if Italy were a rugby league team at the moment, I think they're going to be losing the ball on third tackle every time. They should be one of the worst teams back. And there is potential there with some players, but defensively, again, even from the set piece, I noticed as well. Defensively, from the Welsh lineup, they were just the 6s and 7s and just didn't look organised. And it's worrying times. And we chat in our WhatsApp group before this. I'm almost at the stage of looking at these Italy games and going, oh, geez, do we have to? Because the reason is it's so hard to bet them because the lines are what they are, but they're just such big numbers. But then you can't really make the case for being with Italy. But then can you make the case of being against them when, there's weather here and it's France? And let's be honest with the French, they're coming off that absolute massive victory against England where they'd spend months preparing on the back of the World Cup. Have they really given Italy much thought?
Yeah. I mean, it might even be one of those games to watch the first half because I guess because there's not that many people trading rugby, is there? Especially in play, it's not there's not huge resources poured into it by the bookmakers, by the syndicates, by the people driving the money. You might find that the first half kind of gives you an impression of how the game's going to play, and that the handicap doesn't actually move as much as it should have done. So it might be just one to watch and see how it goes. But I wouldn't bet your money on this game, I don't think. Mark, have you got a view on it, or are you going to be like us, maybe sitting this one out?
Probably, yeah. I've tried to find something. I've tried to sort of claw through all the numbers to find something to sort of cling on to, and it's hard. But the France, at home this century to Italy have been relatively consistent. They've won all their games as you'd expect. 11 of those, 8 of those 11, I should say, by 17 or more points. But interestingly, they did concede at least 10 points in 9 of those 11 games. And if you think the defensive system has improved significantly under Edwards and the current French crop, can they keep Italy below those 10 this time around? If that's the case, then surely that handicap, if it's around 24 points, if you can get it down that far before Sunday, then that potentially comes into play. The first half handicap also, Wales eased past the 12 points against Italy last week. France do tend to be fast starters. Of the last 16, they've only trailed at half-time twice, which was in Twickenham and Dublin last year. And Italy's record is appalling, 48 defeats from 51 away in this competition since March 2016. They've lost all 10 away, 7 of which were by at least 24 points. And they're at least 14 points down at half-time and 6 of those 10 as well. So the kind of numbers there are suggesting that there could be something in the handicap price if you exclude the weather. But just on Italy, Pellegrini again leading the way really in terms of performance at the turnovers and breakdown really. But I was amazed to hear that they actually led the first round of the Six Nations for most carries, most offloads and most passes. It's just a shame that I'd love to see the conversion rate for those offloads and those passes because it seemed atrocious. And the organisation was severely lacking. They looked really disinterested, I thought, as well at times. And I'm quite surprised and disappointed really because I think despite the results being reasonably poor throughout Conor O'Shea's reign, I saw signs of potential progress throughout, and it looked like a step back last weekend. I hope that's not the case because if they do continue to go down this sort of downward spiral after that game in Cardiff, there's going to be bigger and bigger calls now for the relegation and promotion to be brought into this competition, which is a shame really because a lot of money, a lot of investment's gone into this federation to try and make them competitive, and it just doesn't seem to be working at the moment.
It's a funny one, that one, though, wasn't it? I mean, like the Italy team of the late 90s where you have Dominguez playing, I mean, their case at the time, Mark, was a very valid one. I mean, Ireland definitely lost a few games, so France lost games to them. They were tough to beat back then, those teams. They did a proper pack, and even in the early 2000s they weren't bad, but it's just got worse. It seems to be just kind of regressing to the mean, and I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't be against it going back to the Five Nations right now because, like we were just saying here, like we're going to cover 3 games here, but realistically, do we just want to cover 2 most weeks?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a tough one. I mean, look, it's a standard.
The age groups have made reasonable progress, and also the franchises have started to become a little bit more competitive in the Pro 14 as well. So they are making reasonable strides. I think I said last week. It's just a case that some of the bigger, more established Tier 1 nations are making bigger strides in Italy, and it's just making it harder and harder. I can't imagine what the player pool is like in Italy to select from. So I think to even be where they are, it's reasonably impressive. It just doesn't look like that at the end of the game. I actually don't think they were 40 points worse than Wales last week, it should be said. But that's another sort of damning indictment on where they are.
I mean, I prefer having a game than no game.
I'm not totally sure about that.
Visit. I mean,
well, look, it's a standalone game.
I'm not rushing to kick him out.
Let's just see how Scotland get on in Rome later in the competition, and then we can.
That is true.
I think possibly missed the trick by not getting Argentina in several years ago. I think that would have been a real boon to the tournament. But I mean, personally, I don't see how relegation is going to make much difference. You're going to get another team in who's probably marginally better than Italy, but is going to struggle in exactly the same way. It's just going to be a rotating cast of characters. Instead of the same team losing by 30 points, it'll be a different team losing by 30 points. I don't think much will change. I don't think there's a net benefit to everyone having them in there, really. But there's a much bigger conversation for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one comment in on YouTube, just on that game. Good for the game with the, what does he got? The picture of Andre Pollard, is it? I'm not totally sure. Also battling to find a bet in this one. And look, to be honest, like if there isn't one, just leave it go. We don't actually have to bet on every game. I think it's kind of important to remember that. No, we say that, but of course Sunday afternoon comes around and we're probably looking for something, but who knows? Just one more comment out before we leave it there from Shane. Thanks for getting in touch, Shane. Ireland versus Wales is some Mark O'Haire special. Winning margin 1-12 points. Slight edge.
I mean, the man's not wrong.
Shane. He's not wrong. That is the Mark O'Haire special.
Absolute Mark O'Haire. It's a Mark O'Haire special weekend, actually. I mean, it really is. This is where you should be tucking into them. I mean, speaking of which, best bets for the weekend, gents, before we wrap up. Mark, I mean, if it doesn't have the words 1 and 12 in it, I'm going to be fundamentally disappointed in you.
Do you know, it doesn't. It doesn't. Neither of my bets from either two games feature the 1 and 12. It's Scotland with the start against England on Saturday evening. I'm probably putting my balls on the line a bit, really, and expecting England to be nowhere near as good as they were against New Zealand. I think we can probably accurately suggest that they won't be. And if that's the case, I think Scotland can make it a converted try game between the two of them, at least. I fancy them to give England a good game.
Interesting. I mean, it's in our WhatsApp group, Swano, the man who probably has more rugby knowledge than all three of us put together, was saying he was quite big on England at 1.5, just on the outrights on this one. Almost feels he could play both of those bets as well, couldn't you?
Was he not talking about last weekend, though? I think he was.
I thought he was talking about this one.
I'm pretty sure because, he mentioned about England and I know he was very big on England last weekend. So I think he was referencing that.
I do struggle to see England lose this game against Scotland. I'm very much with Mark on the points. I don't think they're going to pull away from Scotland. I struggle to see them losing to Scotland on this one.
I'm not totally sure about that.
And then, Sully, talk us through yours. What's your best?
Yeah, it's a slightly different angle to Mark, but a similar theme. Under 39.5 in Murrayfield. I honestly do believe that it's probably first team to 17. Maybe 20, but I can't see the other team maybe scoring more than 10 or 13. So I think it stays under that. And I think even just looking at the market since we broadcast, I think that line is coming down further. So I'll be quickly kind of getting off this podcast, actually get on myself a bit more maybe. If there's some 39.5 left, I don't think there'll be much. I think what you're probably looking at is that both lines will probably go off at about 37, 38 in Dublin and Murrayfield for the totals. So, it could be an interesting day of rugby. I don't know if we're going to see too much tries or glitz or whatever not. But look, that's the beauty of the Six Nations and proper test rugby. Hard to beat it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this if you don't really love rugby union, it may not be the weekend for you.
Yes, it's a hard one to sell, I'd suggest this week. Yeah, hard one to sell.
Lots of scrapping in the mud and the wind and scraping towards 2 points victories, but that's why we love this game sometimes, and genuinely can't wait for the games this weekend. Lovely to be back with you, gents. Really enjoyed the chat. Looking forward to seeing you next time, and good luck with everything you're betting this weekend, and let us know how you get on. Take care.